Our story begins in a cafe where our protagonist, Kolian, works. He was cleaning and doing all the tasks assigned by his boss, no matter how hard they were. Even when he finished one task, his boss always added another. Kolian had been working there part-time for 4 years, with no incentives or promotions. Despite this, he would help out until very late. Money wasn't his biggest concern. He really just wanted to spend as little time at home as possible. When he arrived home, he opened the door quietly and carefully took off his shoes. Everything was dark and silent, which made him feel a little uneasy. He assumed everyone was asleep, so with his nerves on edge, he tried to go to his room without making a sound. Suddenly, a loud voice from the back stopped him, saying that it was late. Startled, he quickly turned and nervously asked her why she wasn't in bed yet. The voice belonged to a woman with long brown hair, Yesul, his adoptive mother. She was sitting on the couch and calmly explained that she was afraid she'd get angry if he woke her up, so she preferred not to sleep. Kolian, feeling ashamed, apologized, but Yesul, without changing her expression, told him that if he were really sorry, he wouldn't come home so late every day. He became even more worried when he noticed she wasn't even looking at him. Suddenly, Yesul looked up and stared at him, which made Kolian nervously look away. After a sigh, she told him to eat since there was some food left over. He went to the kitchen, wondering whether or not to eat the leftovers. He knew that if he didn't, Yesul would probably get angry. When he got there, he saw a pot with a lot of still warm food and couldn't help but feel impressed by the gesture, which, even though it was a small one, made him think they at least cared that he didn't go hungry. After dinner, he washed the dishes and left everything clean. Exhausted, he headed to his room, hoping nothing else would happen, but suddenly a room door burst open, and a girl with short hair came out in a hurry with a cell phone in her hand. Bumping into him, it was Soyun, his adoptive sister. She was in pain from the blow to her nose and began to angrily yell at him, accusing him of being blind and not seeing her. Kolian, uncomfortable because he knew it wasn't his fault, could only apologize. Despite this, Soyun continued to scold him, saying he didn't look where he was going and that she couldn't even go to the bathroom in peace in her own house. When he tried to explain what had happened, she wasn't interested in listening. Finally, she agreed to forgive him if he gave her 50,000 won to go to the hospital. Kolian knew it was just an insignificant bump. The argument was interrupted by Somin, Soyun's younger sister, a short girl with white hair. Irritated, she came out of her room, shouting that they were too loud. Kolian, feeling guilty, immediately apologized, promising they wouldn't make any more noise. Somin, still annoyed, ironically said that she should have brought a microphone for them to sing into because of the ruckus they were making. Although her reaction seemed exaggerated, Kolian chose to remain silent as she continued to complain and demand that they leave, if they were going to keep talking. Finally, she slammed her room door shut, leaving him speechless. After that, Soyun asked Kolian for money again, and he resignedly and reluctantly agreed. She thanked him with apparent kindness and returned to her room. Kolian sighed, reflecting on how much he hated being in that house. He felt that everyone in that family hated and mistreated him. His biological parents had died 15 years ago, leaving the family in a dispute over who would take care of him. In reality, no one wanted to take on that responsibility, and they all blamed each other. It was then that he met an old man with a strong smell of tobacco, who kindly introduced himself as the CEO of a major shopping center. He explained that Kolian's parents had helped him in the early days of his business, so he decided to offer him a home. Kolian was grateful to him, but his life took a turn when he met the rest of the family. Yesul, the old man's wife, became his adoptive mother, but she always looked at him with a cold stare, as if she wanted to get rid of him. Soyun, the older sister, was dominant like a pack leader who tried to control everything around her. As for Somin, the youngest, she had a difficult, heavy, and rude personality. Despite his efforts, Kolian never got along with them. It had been 5 years since he came to that house when the old man died due to problems caused by his tobacco addiction. His death was painful for the family, but especially for Kolian, who, although he was still surrounded by people, felt lonelier than ever. In the present, Kolian thought that being at home exhausted him more than work. When he got to his room, he lay on his bed, feeling down and reflecting on how, despite having spent 9 years in that house, he could never consider them family. He remembered something on his desk, and when he looked for his wallet, he noticed that he was short on money. Working part-time and studying barely left him any income, and he knew that the day he graduated, they would probably kick him out of the house. With few resources, he tried to save as much as possible. while he was still there, although he wanted to stop thinking about everything that had happened. His mind was still restless, especially after checking his accounts and calculating what Soyun had asked for. Finally, he decided that the best option was to sleep, although he knew that nothing would change when he woke up. In Soyun's room, she opened her drawer and found a box where she kept her money. Inside, she had a picture of Kolyan taped to the bottom. She put the money she had just received from him into the box. When she closed the box, she became thoughtful and blushed. It seemed that the rough treatment she gave him had a hidden meaning she was trying to hide. Meanwhile, in Somin's room, the young woman was sitting on her bed, frustrated. She reflected on how she had wanted to greet Cholyan properly, but ended up getting angry with him as always. She remembered the expression he had made and began to feel guilty about her own actions, calling herself pathetic. In the kitchen, Yesil will notice that the dishes were clean and tidy, something Cholyan had done without her asking. Although she wouldn't admit it, this made her think. Deep down, she, Soyeon, Somin, and Yesul all had the same thought. Maybe it was time to talk to him better. The next morning, in her room, Soyeon received an urgent message from work. They needed a file she should have sent the day before. Still half asleep, she was annoyed, thinking it wasn't fair to receive messages on a Sunday. She wondered if it would have been better to work with her mother, even if it meant being the boss's daughter. Her thoughts were interrupted by her stomach rumbling with hunger. This made her wonder if her mother had already prepared food. She got up to ask her mother if she had made breakfast, but discovered that no one was home. She supposed that Yesul had to work that day. Curious, she went to Somin's room to ask her where their mother had gone, but she wasn't there either. The mess in the room was proof that she hadn't left long ago. Intrigued, she wondered where everyone was and thought about whether Cholyan had gone to work. Noticing that his room door was open, she decided to go in. Sitting on his bed, she remembered how much time had passed since the last time she was in there, since it was usually always locked. Her attention was drawn to a notebook on the bed. When she checked it, she discovered it was Cholyan's bank book. Her surprise grew when she saw that he had much more money than she had imagined. Confused, she began to wonder how he had gotten so much money, especially since their family wasn't that rich, and why he was saving so much. She considered the possibility that he was saving to give them a surprise gift, but quickly dismissed the idea, remembering how badly she had treated him lately. However, the question of why he was accumulating so much money remained in her mind. She came to the conclusion that she had to talk to him and find out his intentions. At the cafe, Cholyan, exhausted, dropped a plate while working. As he bent down to pick it up, his boss approached to see if he was okay. Although he said he was fine, he apologized for the mistake. His boss didn't believe him and noticed that he looked very bad and ordered him to go rest. Cholyan tried to insist that he could keep working, but his boss, worried about his health, insisted because he had never made a mistake like that before. With no other choice, Cholyan accepted, though with concern. On the way home, the boy couldn't help but feel nervous. He was terrified of running into any of the girls. Although he tried to calm down, the stress of the uncertainty overwhelmed him. He finally decided that the best thing to do was to go directly to his room. When he arrived, Cholyan froze when he saw Soyeon in his room. It was the last thing he expected to find. Surprised to see him home early, a nervous Cholyan wanted to know how she had gotten into his room. Soyeon nonchalantly said that she had casually walked in because the door was open, and that it didn't matter because she was there. It was her house after all. Confused, and before he could say anything, Soyeon showed him the envelope, pointing out that he had a lot of money saved. She wanted to know where he had gotten it. Alarmed, Cholyan thought about how she had found the bank book and was afraid that she would try to steal more from him. Not knowing what to say, he tried to think of an excuse, but he was sure that she wouldn't leave him alone. Soyeon insisted again on the reason for the money and why he wasn't answering. With no other option, Cholyan decided to be honest. He explained that he was saving to become independent since he had plans for the future. He kindly asked her to give him the envelope back. Soyeon was shocked by his answer, but refused to give it back. Cholyan didn't understand why, since he had told her the truth. Then she began to doubt his words. She reproached him, saying that if he really planned to be independent, he should have told them before. She clarified that she had actually thought about buying him a gift for the 10 years he had been living with them, as an attempt to redeem herself for not having treated him well. The conversation escalated. Soyeon called him ungrateful for only saving to leave. Cholyan tried to remain calm so as not to make things worse, so he kept a friendly posture to get her to return his bank book. But she kept refusing to give him the envelope. and mocking him for having been silent for so long and deceiving them. Finally, his patience reached its limit. He had been putting up with their mistreatment for too long without saying anything. He grabbed her wrist firmly and pushed her onto the bed, exclaiming angrily that it was enough. Soyeon was surprised and fell silent, impressed to see him angry. Koleon, realizing what he had just done, reacted immediately. He apologized repeatedly and moved away. She, without saying much, got up, kicked him in the leg, and threw the bank book at him, reminding him that it was ridiculous that he had gotten angry over a joke. Then she went out, slamming the door, leaving Koleon bewildered. The boy in his room reflected on what had happened. He realized that he had lost control and was in trouble. He regretted not having handled the situation differently and came to the conclusion that he had to apologize. Soyeon was lying on her bed, looking at her hand, which was still marked by the force with which Koleon had held it. Although she seemed scared, she was actually excited. She had never imagined that he would get angry like that. It was completely unexpected. However, what surprised her the most was how much she had liked the feeling of his large, rough hands, so different from when he was little. Unaware, the adrenaline from the moment, he took her by the hand, led her to get her guitar, and began to play a soft melody. Excitement grew as she imagined how she could defeat him with the strength she now had, and what might have happened if their intentions had been different. The thought of what Koleon could do with those hands intrigued and thrilled her at the same time. She didn't know what kind of man he had become, but imagining him filled her with curiosity and nervousness. A powerful desire to wrestle with him grew, and she couldn't help but whisper his name while playing the guitar, composing a melody inspired by that mix of emotions. Suddenly, someone knocked on her door. It was Koleon, calling her from the other side. Soyeon quickly covered her mouth, afraid he had heard her. Koleon instead began to apologize from the hallway. Noticing she wasn't answering, he felt she might be angry. He continued to explain that he never wanted to act that way, and that he was grateful for the family, especially for the times they didn't leave him alone when he was in high school. Soyeon, with her heart racing, wished he would just shut up and leave. But the more she listened, the more emotions he stirred in her, causing her to continue playing the guitar without understanding why her belief in God was growing stronger with every note. Outside, Koleon was worried by Soyeon's silence, thinking she was truly upset. He decided to wait for her to calm down, but before leaving, he apologized again for pushing her. When she heard him walking away, Soyeon, with a trembling voice, asked him to stay. This left Koleon confused. When Soyeon asked if he was still there, he replied that he had stayed. Taking advantage of the situation, Soyeon told him she was willing to listen to everything he had to say. Koleon accepted and began to talk about the good things Soyeon had done for him in the past, like when she shared her food or lent him her umbrella when he didn't have one. At one point, Koleon mentioned that he couldn't hear her well, so Soyeon moved closer to the door so he could hear her perfectly. Somehow, Koleon thought her voice sounded soft, assuming the apology was working and he had to keep it up. Meanwhile, Soyeon continued to compose on her guitar, letting Koleon's voice fuel her inspiration. Then, Koleon started talking about how he was also grateful to her for taking care of him when he had the flu. This made Soyeon blush. She couldn't stop thinking about how her supposedly younger brother was standing in front of her room. She just couldn't understand her own behavior. Koleon continued to remember things she had done for him until he began to notice a high-pitched sound. He asked if she was okay or if she was upset about what had happened. Alarmed, he tried to force the door open. Startled, Soyeon told him not to open it because her clothes were caught while she was changing. Believing her excuse, Koleon stopped trying to get in. Relieved, Soyeon knew that if he had opened the door and seen her playing the guitar while pretending to be angry, she could only imagine how he would have reacted. She was filled with emotion and nervousness, especially because he was happy outside, but she managed to finish her composition. She calmly told Koleon that she was fine and he could leave. He, thinking she was no longer upset, said goodbye and wished her a good rest. Lying in bed, Soyeon didn't understand what she had just done, or if it was because she found the situation amusing, especially since she thought it was because she had been pushed. Regardless of what it was, it felt strange to her. She had no doubt that her belief in God had only grown stronger. Later that night, a tired Soyeon went down to the kitchen for a glass of water to clear her head. Just then, she heard the front door open. Her mother, Yeseul, and Somin had arrived. Soyeon asked if they had gone out together. Her mother explained that they went to the mall and asked her to set the table because they had brought food for dinner. As she took off her heels, Yeseul noticed Choleon's shoes by the door. Soyeon put the food on the table, and Yeseul, surprised, asked if Choleon was home A nervous Soyun replied that he probably was, but that he had arrived while she was sleeping. She hinted that maybe he wasn't feeling well, and went straight to his room. Although her mother was concerned he might be sick, Soyun thought it would be awkward to see him, and said she would eat later. After dinner, Soyun went to shower. Under the hot water, she began to reflect on her feelings for Kolyan. She couldn't believe that playing the guitar in front of him had excited her so much. The thought of him discovering what she was doing embarrassed her, but also made her wonder if she really liked him. Lost in thought, she ended up drawing Kolyan's face in the bathroom steam. She decided she would try to act as she always had, even though she knew that making him angry had become a habit. As she was walking back to her room, she supposed things would calm down over time. She noticed that Cholyan's door was open again. This seemed strange, but she supposed he might be playing with Fifi, the family pet. Without making a sound, she decided to peek in to see what he was doing. What she saw left her speechless. Yeseul was in bed next to Kolyan. Intrigued about what she was doing there, she watched as Yeseul slowly moved closer to his face. The blush on Yeseul's cheeks was evident, and Soyun, completely baffled, began to imagine the worst. Was it possible that she had kissed him? A few moments earlier, Yeseul had entered Kolyan's room after hearing he was sick. She carefully touched his forehead and was relieved to find he didn't have a fever. However, she couldn't help but worry. She knew how much effort he was putting in, between work and university, just to take care of so many expenses. Just then, Kolyan moved his head closer to her, and this made Yeseul pull away. As she watched him sound asleep, a feeling of tenderness came over her. Unable to resist, she slowly leaned in and kissed him on the cheek. She instantly stood up, startled, as she realized what she had just done. How had she gotten to this point? Memories of her history with Kolyan flooded her mind. Ever since he came into her life, Yeseul had been surprised by the responsibility of raising a boy she didn't know. She took care of him with dedication, but was always aware that one day their paths would separate. That's why she had tried to maintain an emotional distance, repressing any show of affection. After her husband's death, she took over the family business, but in those 3 years, she hadn't managed to make it progress as she had hoped. The pressure was constant, especially from critics who suggested she leave the position, and she had to keep working. That day, Kolyan approached her respectfully and apologized. Yeseul wanted to know if he needed anything. The boy explained that he had started working part-time to help with expenses, and offered her his salary as a contribution. Overwhelmed by stress and pressure, Yeseul exploded. She screamed at him aggressively, reproaching him for having no right to offer her money, and that he shouldn't get any ideas about their relationship. She even questioned him, asking if he was just trying to act like a man. She reminded him that he was not her husband or a real member of the family. When her anger subsided, Yeseul realized she had said terrible things. Kolyan, however, reacted with calmness, assuring her he just wanted to be useful and help in any way he could. From that day on, Kolyan started to see her differently, which caused a confusion that she didn't know how to handle. Overwhelmed by what she had just done, touching him while he was asleep, she decided to leave the room because she felt strange. As she went downstairs, Soyun, who had been hiding, watched as her mother left with a restless expression. Dumbfounded, she tried to process what she had just seen. Had it really been a kiss on the cheek, or something more? She quickly dismissed the idea, convinced it was just maternal love. However, she couldn't help but feel uncomfortable. In the bathroom, she reflected on why they had never been close to him or shown him any affection, even though they had lived together for more than 10 years. She even wondered if she really liked him. Trying to find a logical explanation, she refused to believe it, but the doubts kept swirling in her head, so she just screamed, cursing what was happening. The next day, after a sleepless night filled with confusing thoughts, Soyun decided to leave for work early. She needed to distract herself and stop worrying about things that didn't make sense. As soon as she left her room, and there was no noise, Somin peeked her head out of her room, making sure the house was empty. Once she was sure everyone was gone, she excitedly went into Kolyan's room. Somin had a special ritual. She took out a key to open a drawer, where she kept her dolls. This was a moment she had been waiting for all weekend, as she was going to take advantage of the time she was completely alone. She took her toys and went into Kolyan's room. When she saw the boy's bed, she felt a mix of joy and nervousness. She threw herself onto the sheets, deeply inhaling his scent and exclaiming how much she had missed her Appa's smell. As she played with her dolls, a vague memory came to her of the size of the chalice she had once seen of Cholyan's while he was bathing. She imagined recreating a mass with her doll as the protagonist, and her excitement grew to the point of murmuring his name out loud in her game. She fantasized about the idea of Kolyan being both kind and rough with her, wishing he would never leave her alone. She even started thinking about what she would do for him, no matter how embarrassing or unimaginable it was for her. Kolyan was the perfect guide on her path to God. Lost in her thoughts, Soman continued to talk out loud while playing, constantly calling Kolyan by his name. She didn't realize that Soyeon was outside the room, listening to everything. Soyeon was left speechless. What she had heard left her completely confused. She didn't understand what she had just witnessed, and began to seriously question everything that was happening in that house. While at work, Soyeon went to the company bathroom, unable to get everything that was happening at home out of her head. Thinking that her mother had kissed Cholyan while he was sleeping and that her sister was playing with dolls in his room seemed ridiculous and out of place. What was happening to them? She also couldn't understand why they weren't worried about someone finding them out. She felt anxiety consuming her, especially at the thought that all this might make Colian uncomfortable and lead him to decide to leave the house. She didn't want that to happen, so she decided she had to do something about it. As she reflected, she remembered he was saving money to become independent. She thought she could use that money as an excuse to get Cholyan away from the house and protect him from the uncomfortable situations that were developing. A few days later, Colian was in his room, trying hard to study. Suddenly, he felt a bad vibe, as if something was approaching. He was right. Soyeon walked in without knocking and greeted him. Colian, surprised, looked at her and asked what was wrong. Without hesitation, she asked if he had already given her all the money he had, or if he still had some saved. Colian, uncomfortable with the sudden question, replied that he had given her everything. Indignant, Soyeon reprimanded him, questioning how he could have kept so little. Cholyan confirmed, a little embarrassed, that it was all he had. Although Soyeon's question seemed to be leading up to asking for more money, she surprised him by handing him an envelope and forcing him to take it. Despite his attempts to refuse, she ordered him to thank her for the gesture before she got angry with him. Colian, confused, tried to stop her, but she had already left the room. Looking at the envelope, he felt a mix of gratitude and nervousness. Why was Soyeon suddenly giving him money? He thought maybe she felt some kind of guilt, since those kinds of people start to fear karma. He was also more worried, because Soyeon kept visiting him. The girl, knowing he wanted to be independent, showed him options of where he could move to, saying she could help him a little because she had time. This confused Colian even more. She was somehow helping him to achieve his independence? If that was the case, he was grateful, but also felt it was a little strange. He commented to the girl that the apartment options she had found for him were mostly scams or non-existent places. She, embarrassed by the result, feigned indifference and pressured him, assuring him that any place would be good for him. This, combined with her outbursts of frustration, made Colian's days increasingly tense. One night, Soyeon was at a bar, visibly distraught. Nothing she had planned was working as she had hoped. She had tried to give him money so he could find his own place, but he didn't seem to be moving quickly. Plus, the apartments she had found for him had turned out to be a disaster, and the process was getting expensive. Now, she supposed that achieving independence wasn't so simple, but if she didn't do anything, she didn't think she could handle what the others might do to him. Watching a couple at the bar, she quietly cursed men, frustrated by what she considered their stupidity. She should seduce him, she thought, since Colian was inexperienced with women. It might be easier to influence him, but she quickly dismissed the idea, knowing that he would find any excuse to avoid her, which would only make things more awkward. She reflected that if she had been kinder to him in the past, everything would be different now. Even if she told him she liked him, she doubted it would work. This made her call herself stupid. Later that same night, Colian was leaving work. He felt lucky that he finished everything without any problems, and now needed to go home. Across the street, he saw Soyeon walking with difficulty. She looked dizzy and shaky, which immediately alarmed him. He shouted her name, and she turned around angrily, demanding to know what he was doing there. Colian explained that he had just gotten off work and asked why she was in that state. However, seeing her expression, he started to wonder why she looked so upset with him, or if he had done something wrong. Soyeon coldly pushed him away, which worried Colian even more. He couldn't just leave her alone. When he insisted on knowing where she was going since their house was on the other side of the street, she replied that it didn't matter. When she tried to keep walking, her ankle twisted, and she was about to fall. Colian reacted quickly, grabbing her by the waist to stop her from falling. Despite her discomfort, she accepted his help, blushing and wondering why this had to happen to her. Walking together down the street, Colian asked her with concern why she was in that state. He knew she used to drink, but she shouldn't go past her limits. Her red eyes suggested something else had happened. That's why Cholian tried to talk to her. He wasn't sure if something had happened, but if she was upset or going through a bad time, he wouldn't mind if she shared it with him. Even if he couldn't do much to help, he believed it was always good to have someone to talk to or vent to. He complimented her, saying she looked prettier when she smiled than when she was angry. Of course, in her mind, Soyeon didn't understand why he was saying all that. Cholian continued, assuring her that he would never judge her, and that she had nothing to worry about if she wanted to talk to him. However, Soyeon firmly told him to shut up, although she was more than pleased by what she was hearing. This caused her body to react strangely, making her feel as if she were going to throw up while her face turned red. Despite everything, she told him she was fine, which left Cholian thoughtful, as she seemed sick or in pain. For her part, Soyeon was very nervous. But suddenly, she made a decision. She felt exhausted and wanted to rest because she felt she would collapse if she kept walking. Cholian didn't understand and suggested they go back home, but Soyeon interrupted him, pointing to a nearby magic village. He got nervous, believing they shouldn't go, but she insisted they were family and that if anything happened, they could handle it. Before they knew it, they were inside the village. Cholian, still in disbelief about the situation, decided to go a little further and quickly helped Soyeon lie down on a bed so she could rest. He told her that once she recovered, they would leave as soon as possible, to which she agreed. Cholian never would have imagined being in a place like this in a situation like that, much less with Soyeon. He took a bottle of water and brought it to her, trying to encourage her to drink to hydrate herself. However, the more time he spent there, the more anxious he felt, wishing he could go home as soon as possible. He knew he couldn't leave her alone because, in her state, she couldn't take care of herself. The only thing he could do was wait. As he watched her, he asked if she felt better, just as she was drinking water and spilling some on her shirt. Quickly, Cholian looked for something to dry her, but Soyeon began to take off her wet shirt as it was uncomfortable to wear. This made him feel even more uneasy, thinking she shouldn't act that way without warning. Although they had spent a lot of time together, he felt she should be more careful in those situations. Seeing something on the floor, his worry grew. He finally sat down, reflecting on how some people had no shame, but acknowledging that he himself felt even more ashamed, wishing Soyeon would be considerate of his feelings. The discomfort of the moment made him feel like his soul was fading away. On the other hand, Soyeon, while bathing, thought about how she had brought Cholian to the magic village. Although she wasn't sure if she would go through with her plan, she noticed that the boy was more innocent and obedient than she had imagined, to the point of getting upset every time she took a shower. After all, he still saw her as part of his family and didn't understand why he was so worried. As she imagined various things, she thought about having a ceremony in the room, but realized she had never done anything like that before. Still, she wanted to try it with him, since they hadn't come all this way for nothing. However, she didn't know what to do next because she hadn't planned it all out. She knew she had to act, because otherwise, she wouldn't have another chance. If they were to have that ceremony, it would be the first time for both of them. It would also be special for Cholian, as it would be his first experience of that kind. But then she came back to her senses and reminded herself that she didn't like him, especially because she remembered they didn't have rosaries. She thought about looking for some in the drawer next to the bed, although she doubted whether it would be necessary to bring them. She also reflected on the quality of the rosaries in magic villages, which wasn't very good, and tried to calculate the dates she was usually prepared for these occasions. Nevertheless, her nerves consumed her when she saw Cholian so embarrassed. She acknowledged that neither of them had experience in ceremonies, although she doubted if he was secretly waiting for that moment too. If she played her cards right, she might get him to take the initiative. She was sure he had at least considered it, since everyone has desires related to religion at some point. With that idea in mind, she decided that once the ceremony was over, everything would be fine. Meanwhile, Cholian was sitting in a chair, feeling extremely uncomfortable about being in a magic village with Soyeon, especially knowing she felt comfortable enough to bathe there. He wished with all his might that nothing strange would happen again. When Soyeon returned, Cholian asked her to stop doing strange things and questioned why she was wearing a robe instead of her normal clothes. She replied that it was wet, and therefore she couldn't wear it. Although Cholian already knew this, he still thought it wasn't appropriate and asked her to adjust the robe better. He didn't understand why she was looking at him that way so naturally and without any shame in being like that in front of him. In his thoughts, he wondered what was happening. He believed that Soyeon was one of those people who didn't feel a shred of modesty. Determined to alleviate his discomfort, he got up with the intention of going to buy her some clothes at the nearby store, as he felt that if he left her like that, he would die of embarrassment. Just as he was about to leave, Soyeon stopped him by hugging him from behind. Confused, Koleon asked her what she was doing. She denied needing anything else, but he was too nervous about the sudden gesture and kept insisting on going to get her something so she wouldn't catch a cold. Finally, he told her he would go down to buy her a shirt, but Soyeon told him to forget that and stay with her. Koleon didn't understand Soyeon's strange behavior and thought she probably wasn't in her right mind. While he felt her embrace, he sensed some of her feelings and wanted to get her off him before he did or said anything inappropriate. He asked her to let go, assuring her he wasn't going anywhere, and after a few moments, she slowly did. Trying to calm her down, Koleon explained that he was truly worried about her. He warned her that if she acted so helpless with a man, she could be misunderstood, and that it was important to be careful with that. Although he understood that she might not be aware of her attitude, if something similar happened with someone else, the situation would be different. To solve the problem, he offered to lend her his clothes, as it was difficult for him to look at her in that state, especially because he was a man, and she should be more considerate. Soyeon's heart raced when she heard this. Koleon, noticing her silence, was afraid he had upset her. However, she suddenly took him by the arms and moved in very close. Disconcerted, he asked her if she was angry, apologizing if he had offended her. It was then that Soyeon, without warning, gave him a tender kiss. Koleon was completely stunned, and when she pulled away, he was still trying to process what had just happened. It was then that Soyeon told him that people sometimes couldn't contain themselves when there was a perverse scent in the air, and added that she didn't need his opinion because the real culprit was him. The comment left Soyeon even more confused. He thought she was angry and now didn't understand why she was acting so unexpectedly. He decided that it would be best to maintain some distance, so he tried to calm her down by suggesting that maybe what she had drunk earlier was affecting her. However, before he could continue, Soyeon kissed him again. This second kiss left him speechless. On the other hand, Soyeon felt an indescribable warmth. For her, the moment was too pleasant, and she couldn't help but wish for something more intimate. Just when it seemed like the atmosphere was becoming more intense, Koleon grabbed her by the shoulders and asked her to stop. He wanted to understand what was wrong with her before going on. He explained that if her behavior was influenced by alcohol, it would be a serious mistake to continue. Soyeon, with a face full of concern, asked him why he was saying that and wanted to know if he really didn't want to be with her or if he didn't find satisfaction in being together. Surprised by her words, Koleon didn't know how to react. Then Soyeon, with a hint of sadness, mentioned that she would be disappointed if he really saw her that way. A nervous Koleon could only swallow before sighing deeply. He explained that even though they weren't related by blood, he saw her as part of his family, and that's why he didn't think it was right. He added that if they were to do something, he felt it would only be the result of an impulse derived from some misunderstanding. He clarified that he would always be willing to listen to her if something happened, no matter the detail, but that this was not the right path. Soyeon, visibly affected, tried to say something, but before she could utter the words, "I like you," she fell silent. She began to think about what she was about to confess, wondering why she felt so ashamed. Although she wanted to express what she felt, she wasn't sure he would believe her. In the end, she was trapped in her doubts, not knowing if all this could be justified as a simple game or if she should face the reality of her feelings. Koleon was still confused, waiting for an explanation. Soyeon, with a lost look, began to speak. She confessed that she had been going through a very difficult time lately, and that in the midst of her loneliness, her faith in religion had become a pent-up need. However, it was impossible for her to pray with just anyone. It was difficult to find someone suitable, and she hoped that Choleon could understand. She thought that by sharing a mass with him, everything would be safe and natural. These words left Koleon speechless. The atmosphere between them became somber, charged with a tension he couldn't ignore. Internally, Soyeon felt that she had ruined it. She was sure he saw her as a completely irrational person, and began to regret not having remained silent. Koleon, meanwhile, covered his mouth, trying to assimilate what he had just heard. He knew that many people were interested in Soyeon and wondered why she had decided to come to him of all people. He imagined that she must be going through something really serious to seek his support, remembering the promise he had made to listen to her problems. Noticing his silence, Soyeon began to get discouraged. However, Koleon broke the tension by agreeing to have a mass with her. He explained that if she was facing something so difficult, he couldn't just ignore it. He would do everything possible to help her. Koleon's words brightened Soyeon, who excitedly asked him if he was serious. He confirmed it firmly, acknowledging that he couldn't act as if nothing were happening. This made Soyun's heart beat even faster. Although she tried to hide it, Kolyan continued, assuring her that while he didn't know much about guiding someone in their faith, he would do everything in his power. But before he could finish, Soyun interrupted him with a blunt, "No." She thanked him for his willingness, but knew that in reality, she just wanted to share that moment with him, while trying to calm his thoughts. A nervous Kolyan admitted that he had no experience and didn't know how to make the chalice shine. He looked at Soyun, who seemed expressionless, but was internally delighted by his sincerity and tenderness. Moved, Soyun accepted Kolyan's conditions and decided to guide him. As a first lesson, she began to clean the chalice, concentrating with great care. Kolyan watched her in silence, feeling a strange warmth inside. Although he had believed that faith would be of no use to him, something inside him seemed to be changing. Still, he couldn't help but ask Soyun if she didn't think it was already clean. She firmly denied it, convinced that there was still much to be done. Kolyan continued to watch her, wondering if she wasn't straying from her original purpose. However, he didn't want to interrupt her, fearing that if he did, she might spill the holy water. Unfortunately, as he got distracted, he ended up tipping the container over. He scolded himself, feeling like a complete novice, and immediately apologized to Soyun, who seemed distracted. Still, he decided to get her a towel to clean up the mess, but he was surprised when she began to drink the holy water. The gesture left him stunned. He didn't understand what was happening. Moments before, Soyun had been aggressive, but now she seemed completely adorable as she drank the water. An embarrassed Kolyan couldn't look away. For her part, Soyun felt her soul begging to be purified. She approached Kolyan and, with determination, told him that it was time to perform the mass. The atmosphere became charged with emotions. Soyun felt that she had to release the pent-up stress and begin the ceremony immediately. However, Kolyan hesitated, especially after having spilled the holy water. Soyun, although embarrassed, had a different perspective. When she looked at the chalice, they were both shocked. It was shining brightly like a star. Convinced it was a sign, Soyun stated that there was no need to wait. She offered to take care of everything, asking Kolyan to simply relax. Before she could begin the first prayer, a flustered Kolyan asked her to stop. This made Soyun look at him strangely, and, almost as a reflex, she asked if he was about to back out. Kolyan quickly denied it, assuring her that he had no intention of stopping the ceremony. With a mix of nerves and seriousness, Kolyan added that he wanted to truly help her, but also wanted to know if she would let him lead her for a while during the mass. Soyun, surprised and moved, agreed, letting him take the initiative for the first time. Soyun's heart was pounding, though she tried to act indifferent by asking if that was all Kolyan wanted to tell her. Inside, however, she couldn't help but feel a tenderness toward him. She decided to lie down for a moment. While he prepared the necessary items for the mass, Kolyan, for his part, finished organizing what they would use while a nervous Soyun watched him with curiosity. From that perspective, everything seemed both strange and natural at the same time. When Kolyan asked her if they would need a rosary, Soyun calmly denied it, assuring him that it wouldn't be necessary since this was a special and safe day. With this answer, Kolyan began reading from the Bible. Soyun, although excited about the start of the ceremony, suddenly felt a weight on her soul. The pain she felt was so evident that she didn't understand it. She supposed that maybe it was normal in all ceremonies, but the most important thing for her was that she was with Kolyan, praying together. As he read, Kolyan noticed her discomfort and asked if she was okay. Soyun, trying to hide her unease, lied, saying that she was just a little shocked, asking him not to worry and to continue. These words made him blush, but encouraged him to keep reading. Soyun, for her part, stopped worrying about the specific content of the prayers. The only thing that mattered was that the connection with Kolyan made her feel a warmth she had never experienced inside. Kolyan also felt strange, and although he didn't completely understand what was happening, he wanted them both to be able to share their faith and find God's path together. Suddenly, Soyun interrupted, visibly embarrassed, to ask him if he also felt a similar peace when praying together. Kolyan, even more ashamed, replied that he did, and that he liked it. This acknowledgement made Soyun cup his face in her hands and congratulate him for being so honest. However, when a curious Kolyan returned the question, a nervous Soyun tried to downplay it, saying somewhat arrogantly that it wasn't so bad. Despite her evasive attitude, Kolyan knew that there was still something in her soul that needed to be purified. As Soyun tried to boast about her experience in front of a beginner like him, Ko-Leon decided to speed up his reading of the Bible. This caught Soyeon's attention, and she asked him why he was reading so fast. Ko-Leon explained that he wanted to help her genuinely find her faith and forget about the problems that had led her to this point. Ko-Leon's sincerity made an ashamed Soyeon ask him to slow down, as she felt more relaxed if they prayed calmly. With each prayer, Soyeon noticed that her mind was going blank, unable to fully control her body. When she mentioned that she was going to get more holy water, Ko-Leon insisted that he would take care of it. However, in his clumsiness, he ended up spilling it on her. He quickly apologized, but Soyeon, with a flushed face, admitted that she felt much more at peace, as if her soul had been completely purified. They looked at each other in silence for a moment until Cho-Leon approached her with an unexpected proposal to continue the Mass. A confused but excited Soyeon agreed, as they prayed for her well-being. Soyeon thought that Cho-Leon's devotion was reaching unexpected levels. She, however, felt that she couldn't keep up with him. Although she wanted to lead the ceremony, her body and mind seemed to be at their limit, as if she couldn't even make a sound. Determined not to give up, Soyeon decided to take the initiative. She closed her eyes and began to pray silently for a small rabbit, imagining it tenderly in her mind. Ko-Leon, watching her, felt a slight unease when he saw her concentrated but strange expression. Wanting to help her, he suggested a breathing technique he had learned. The proposal confused Soyeon, who was about to complain that she should be leading the Mass. However, she couldn't. The calm that the breathing gave her completely disarmed her, leaving her in a state of absolute peace. When Cho-Leon saw her so relaxed, he understood that maybe she was exhausted. His intention had worked, and now they both shared a moment of authentic spiritual connection. Ko-Leon couldn't stop thinking about how different Soyeon looked. That girl who was so aggressive with him now seemed adorable as she relaxed during the ceremony. However, discomfort overwhelmed him, and he decided to express his gratitude with prayers to the Lord, hoping that everything would get better. Despite this, Soyeon asked him to go slower, but Cho-Leon, immersed in his fervor, didn't seem to hear her. This situation frustrated Soyeon, who, in an attempt to get his attention, threatened to get angry if he continued to ignore her. Still, he continued with the Mass. Soyeon began to wonder if he had always been like this, or if the enthusiasm of having his first Mass had transformed him. She even questioned if Ko-Leon's devotion was due to a profound change in his personality from believing in God. She remembered small details, like never having seen him play with Fifi at home, and came to the conclusion that maybe they needed to adjust the ceremony or the relaxation posture, but it was impossible to move. The prayers were taking effect, leaving her completely immobile. She noticed that the closeness between them was too much. Blushing, she covered her mouth, worried about being too loud when reciting her prayers. Cho-Leon, noticing this, gently took her hands and moved them away so he could hear her. Surprised and embarrassed, Soyeon tried to stop him, but he ignored her words. Then, without warning, Ko-Leon kissed her. The gesture left her in shock. Before she could react, he resumed reading the Bible as if nothing had happened. Soyeon felt the world spinning. Her mind was overflowing with questions. She didn't understand why Ko-Leon was acting as if nothing had happened, or how it was possible that he didn't notice that she had already spilled the holy water. Although she tried to mention it to him, she ended up getting lost in her own thoughts. She wondered if it had really been a good idea to propose the Mass, even though she never expected him to act so impulsively. Despite feeling a little annoyed, she couldn't help but find him more fascinating. As she watched him hold her hands, she wondered if it wouldn't be better if he hugged her. When she finally asked him to let go, he flatly refused, increasing her confusion. Although she should be angry at his attitude, she couldn't stop her heart from beating faster. Ko-Leon got up to get more holy water. After purifying it again, the Mass finally came to an end. Soyeon, with her soul still tingling from the purification, breathed a sigh of relief. However, she couldn't help but be intrigued if Ko-Leon had truly found God's path. He, for his part, got too close to her, causing Soyeon to look away. Disconcerted when she saw that he was holding the Bible in his hand, she thought he wanted to continue with the ceremony. But she stopped him, asking for a break. Suddenly, a small scream echoed from the magic village, bringing the night to an end. The next morning, Soyeon was visibly annoyed. In front of her, Ko-Leon remained with his head down, unable to find the words to apologize. He knew that during the Mass, he had lost control, letting his enthusiasm dominate him. Soyeon reproached him, reminding him that although she had proposed the Mass, it didn't mean he could act so recklessly. She scolded him for reading the Bible nonstop, ignoring her attempts to stop him. She even mentioned how he had held her hands without letting go, and how the mass had been so fast that she could barely breathe. Ko-Leon listened in silence, with a completely flushed face as she pointed at him. But then something unexpected happened. A still blushing So-yoon told him that if she ever mentioned the idea of a mass again, they would do it again. Ko-Leon was surprised and confused. He didn't know how to respond. In his mind, he felt that he couldn't refuse, although the idea of repeating the experience seemed strange to him. He couldn't help but think about how special it had been. His thoughts were interrupted by So-yoon, who, noticing his distraction, asked if he hadn't liked the ceremony. He quickly denied it, sincerely confessing that the mass had been wonderful. However, he began to question whether that was the result of So-yoon's initiative or something deeper. Despite his doubts, he ended up agreeing to the idea of repeating it in the future. On the way home, So-yoon mentioned that she had a backache. Something she noticed was getting more and more intense. Ko-Leon could only apologize, visibly uncomfortable about what had happened. So-yoon noticed his attitude and punched him in the back. He reacted in pain, asking her why she had done that. She replied that she didn't want him to be next to her looking uncomfortable, since that also made her uncomfortable. When they arrived in front of their house, the protagonist checked his cell phone and realized he had many missed calls and messages from Yeseol. He wondered if she was angry. He opened the door very carefully, thinking that Yeseol would have already left for work by that hour. However, when they entered, they were met by Yeseol, who, visibly annoyed, asked them why they were coming home together so late, and without giving notice. The fright made them jump, and she insisted on an explanation. The three of them went to the living room. Once they were seated, Yeseol began to scold them, saying that if they planned to come home late, they should at least give notice. She admitted that she understood that they were both adults and usually solved their problems on their own, but she couldn't help but worry about them. Then she turned her attention to Ko-Leon, questioning him if he was disobeying her recommendation to come home early. Nervous, he denied it, but Yeseol insisted on knowing why they had come home together. Ko-Leon, not knowing how to respond, remained silent. His nerves intensified, as it was the first time Yeseol had scolded him like that. Noticing this, So-yoon intervened, explaining that the night before, she had met Ko-Leon on the street and they decided to go for some drinks, since she didn't like to drink alone. She admitted that after drinking too much, she ended up passing out, which prevented her from contacting Yeseol. This worried Ko-Leon a little, but Yeseol didn't seem entirely convinced, and asked since when they were so close. So-yoon replied that they had been living together for 10 years, and that it wasn't uncommon for them to go out and have fun occasionally. The answer left Yeseol thoughtful, although Ko-Leon knew in his mind that she still didn't entirely believe the story. Despite this, Yeseol decided to let the matter go, and allowed them both to leave. However, she couldn't take her eyes off them. As they went up the stairs, Ko-Leon felt relieved that the situation was over, but a frustrated So-yoon questioned why he was so bad at lying. Then she added that despite everything, he had done a good job covering for her, and that she expected his thanks. Ko-Leon could only look at her with concern. When he got to his room, he couldn't stop thinking about how strange the situation was, especially since he had really had a mass with his Nuna. He didn't know what would happen if someone found out, so he decided to stay out of sight for a while. However, he remembered that So-yoon had suggested that they could have another mass whenever she wanted. The idea made him blush, although he thought she probably wasn't serious. Even so, he felt strangely anxious for that moment. As the days passed, Ko-Leon noticed that So-yoon hadn't reached out to him, which made him assume that the promise was something she had mentioned without thinking. Although he wanted to talk to her about it, he knew it was something she had to decide on, so it would be strange if he initiated the conversation. Just as he was lost in his thoughts, So-yoon called out to him several times, asking if he could hear her. Ko-Leon apologized, explaining that he was distracted. She, amused, began to tease him, hinting that he was thinking about something naughty, which made him blush. Seeing his reaction, So-yoon wondered if she had actually figured it out. Ko-Leon thought that since she had brought up the topic, it was a good time to talk about the promise. However, Yeseol suddenly appeared, asking what they were doing together. This caused Ko-Leon to panic, and he quickly told them that it was nothing, and that he was just leaving for work. His strange reaction confused them both. As he left, Ko-Leon felt like he was going crazy. He didn't understand what he was thinking. He knew that if So-yoon truly needed to talk, she would do it that night. That night, as Ko-Leon was heading to his room, So-yoon stopped him, saying she needed to talk to him for a moment. This intrigued him, but she wanted to know what he was going to tell her before he left for work, especially about the promise they had made last time. Ko-Leon noticed that Yeseol was nearby, listening, so he quickly improvised, saying he remembered an urgent errand. Although So-yoon tried to stop him, Cholian didn't understand why she was bringing up those kinds of topics when Yesil was so close. While in her room, Soyeon wondered how many days had passed like this. She no longer felt the same excitement playing the guitar alone. She was exhausted and felt like she was losing her mind. She had even tried to convince him to be the one to take the initiative and bring up the topic first, but lately, she felt that Cholian was avoiding her. She didn't know if she should send him a message to propose having another mass. It hadn't even been that long since the last one, and she already wanted to ask for it again. She was afraid it would make her seem desperate, but she also understood that Cholian wouldn't take that step himself. She was torn between taking the initiative or not. The idea of someone helping her find the path to God, like the last time, seemed comforting to her. Thinking about this, she decided to look for something she had stored in her closet, although she didn't remember exactly where she had put it. After a while, she found it and couldn't help but be surprised that she still had it. A little later, she was seen trying on a cosplay she had bought by accident, but to her surprise, found charming. It made her look really cute, and she couldn't help but imagine showing it to Cholian. She thought that maybe with that, she could encourage him to celebrate a mass with her. The idea made her dream of possibilities so much that she was excited just thinking about it. However, she didn't understand why she was trying on that cosplay, or what the difference would be between wearing it and just talking to him about it. In the middle of her thoughts, she heard Cholian outside the room, asking to talk to her for a moment and if he could come in. A distracted Soyeon gave him permission, without thinking too much, until she remembered who was outside. She was startled when she realized it was Cholian, and didn't understand why he had decided to show up at that moment. When she wanted to stop him from entering, it was already too late. Cholian had opened the door. Although he seemed a little embarrassed, he explained that he just wanted to talk to her for a minute. However, what he didn't understand was why Soyeon was trying to cover the cosplay she was wearing with her hands. Cholian was completely surprised to see Soyeon, who was trying to find an excuse or something to say to avoid being misinterpreted as a pervert. However, her nerves prevented her from speaking. As she searched for the words, Cholian unexpectedly approached, causing her to trip and fall onto her bed. A confused Soyeon asked him what was wrong or why he was approaching so suddenly. However, to her surprise, Cholian simply covered her with a blanket. This left her bewildered, and before she could say anything, visibly nervous, he shouted at her, asking what she was doing. Cholian added that even if she was in her own room, she couldn't walk around dressed in a cosplay, and should put on something more appropriate. Surprised by his reaction, Soyeon responded with another question, assuring him that it didn't matter what she was wearing as long as she was in her room. Then she wanted to know why he was looking for her. It was at that moment that Cholian reconsidered his actions. Although he was a little embarrassed, he remembered that he had gone to talk to her about the promise they had made last time. This led him to think about how Yesil had mentioned that she had something urgent to do, so he considered it the perfect time to address the topic. However, he didn't expect to find her wearing a cosplay. This unexpected encounter made him so nervous that he forgot what he wanted to say. In his mind, Cholian was trying to understand the situation and thought that if Soyeon needed to have a mass or something similar, she should prepare better. Although he believed that this wasn't the right time, he told himself that if necessary, she should let him know in advance so he could be ready. Soyeon watched with flushed cheeks, but couldn't help but ask the boy why his eyes seemed to be avoiding her and if he was very nervous. This made Cholian even more internally unsettled. Still, Soyeon insisted on knowing why he had come to tell her all that if he had been avoiding her for days. Cholian had decided to keep his distance so that Yesil wouldn't suspect anything, thinking it would be better to talk when she wasn't around. Soyeon, however, thought they could have talked about the matter through text messages, but understood that he had preferred to go directly to her room. Reflecting on this, she concluded that Yesil was not at home at the moment. This led her to think that Cholian might have gone with the intention of having a mass with her right then. The idea made Cholian even more nervous, since he didn't understand exactly what Soyeon was referring to. She didn't believe him. She noticed how embarrassed he was, and even if he tried to pretend otherwise, she was convinced that her assumption was correct. He had gone there with the intention of praying together. This led her to wonder if they should start immediately. Cholian, on the other hand, wasn't sure he wanted to do it since Somin was in the next room. But for Soyeon, that didn't pose a problem. She knew her sister was wearing headphones, listening to music, or probably sleeping, so as long as they didn't make too much noise, everything would be fine. With a calm smile, she told Cholian that they could begin if he wished, and asked him what he wanted to do. The boy didn't know how to respond. Although he secretly wanted to fulfill Soyeon's request, he was afraid they might be discovered. Despite that, he felt he had to follow his Nuna's instructions, although the uncertainty left him restless. Finally, Cholian asked her once more, if she was sure it would be okay to have a mass there, since they could be discovered. A slightly impatient Soyun responded by asking him why he kept insisting when she had already assured him that it was no problem. She also made it clear that if he didn't want to have a mass, it wasn't an obligation. At this, a nervous Koleon denied that he didn't want to do it, so he decided to go ahead and have a mass with her. Before they started, he approached and gave her a tender kiss. Soyun, in her mind, felt that the kiss was a little long but didn't complain. Then Koleon got up and went to look for some breads that Soyun had saved. The girl, as she watched him, wondered how it was possible that just by looking at him, she felt her soul begging to pray. She acknowledged that Koleon had an indescribable warmth, something that connected her deeply to God's path, even if he didn't notice it. While Choleon looked for a gummy button among Soyun's things, she let out a slight laugh. This caused him to ask her to be quiet. An ashamed Soyun covered her mouth while thinking that Koleon could be quite arrogant. Still, he continued with the preparations for the mass. Soyun, for her part, continued to reflect on how strangely peaceful the whole situation made her feel. Choleon began to perform a jutsu technique, and, distracted, she couldn't help but keep watching him. It was difficult for her to remain silent, especially because she didn't understand how he managed to make her feel so relaxed with so little. It was at that moment, while distracted, that Soyun tripped, accidentally spilling the holy water. At this, Koleon reacted quickly and covered Soyun's mouth, insisting that they couldn't make any noise. He was worried that someone had heard them, although from the other side of the room, there didn't seem to be any signs that anyone had noticed what was happening. This calmed him down a little, but on the other hand, Soyun was a little confused. Suddenly, an idea crossed her mind. She took the boy's hand and began to give him little kisses on the palm, while asking him in a soft voice to hurry up and start the mass. A nervous Koleon replied that although he also wanted to begin, he never would have imagined that her laughter or praises could resonate so loudly. Then he thought of a way to make less noise and showed her a picture of a puppy, suggesting they pray for it. Soyun, although she felt embarrassed by the proposal, couldn't refuse if it came from Choleon. In his mind, he noticed how obedient she was, much more than he had imagined. When Soyun was ready to begin, Koleon started reading the first paragraph of the Bible. This made her feel ashamed, as everything was unusually quiet. As he read, Koleon decided to do it at a slow pace to avoid making noise, but he couldn't help but feel an inner peace that motivated him to continue. Everything was going so well that he even wondered if he could speed up a little. Without thinking twice, he began to pray with greater intensity without stopping. Soyun, for her part, was disconcerted. She didn't understand where so much emotion from Choleon was coming from, but as she watched him, he reflected on how the purity of Soyun's soul seemed to be giving way little by little, overflowing as his praises increased in volume. She felt that it was becoming more and more difficult for her to breathe. The yoga pose she was in seemed humiliating to her, not only because Choleon had absolute control over the mass, but also because she found an unexpected tranquility in her heart. This was embarrassing for her, as she didn't understand why she felt so at peace, or if she even liked this feeling. After all, she wasn't someone who usually prayed while doing yoga. She remembered that something similar had happened when Koleon took her hands for the first time. Amid the accelerated praises, it was difficult for her to think clearly. She didn't know how she had gotten to this mass, but the only thing she could focus on was the feeling of purification and peace that was invading her soul. As the prayers continued, Soyun suddenly collapsed, unable to keep up with Koleon's pace. The boy began to worry when he didn't hear her praising with the same energy as before. Looking at her, he noticed that she looked exhausted, so he asked her if she was okay, and if she preferred him to read the Bible more slowly. Soyun took a moment to respond, but finally told him that everything was fine, and asked him to continue with the prayers. Encouraged by her words, they both continued to pray with fervor, seeking the path to God. Soyun began to feel that, at this rate, she could achieve a divine revelation. However, she stumbled again, spilling the holy water once more. A visibly worried Koleon wondered if she had reached her limit. He felt that Soyun was going through a complicated situation, but when his Nuna asked him to continue, he decided to keep reading the Bible without stopping. Meanwhile, Soyun was lost in her thoughts. She acknowledged that her soul no longer seemed to respond to her, but that didn't worry her. She was willing to let herself be guided like a faithful servant, finding comfort in it. On the other hand, Koleon felt that he could no longer contain himself. He went for the holy water to finish the mass, and used the liquid to purify Soyun's sins. In that instant, they could both rest for a bit. However, in Choleon's mind, The worry that his praises had been too loud lingered, as well as the doubt of whether he had been too rough with Soyun or if she would be angry like the last time. Kolyan was convinced that Soyun had achieved an inner spiritual peace, so he began to pack everything up before anyone could catch them. He planned to finish quickly so that once Soyun regained her strength, she could leave. However, to his surprise, she took the chalice, not to continue the ceremony but to clean it. With a voice full of enthusiasm, she expressed her desire to have another mass. This left Kolyan bewildered, especially since he had already used the holy water and wasn't sure he could continue. He was also worried that the room still needed to be cleaned. Even though he felt that things couldn't go on like this, he taught Soyun a yoga technique that would help purify her heart better. Although he doubted he could avoid making noise, he covered her mouth before he began to read the verses of the Bible quickly. However, Soyun ended up gently biting him, which caught him by surprise. She took the opportunity to ask him directly if he enjoyed the tranquility of sharing a mass with her. Although Sholian didn't understand why she was asking him those questions, he admitted, a little embarrassed, that he liked guiding her on God's path. He acknowledged that although her soul was a little corrupted, he had hope of helping her find the light. But upon hearing this, Kolyan noticed how Soyun's energy seemed to overflow, which put him on alert. Determined not to let his guard down, he planned to finish the, quote, mass as soon as possible to avoid more setbacks. As he continued reading, he began to feel an inner peace, but he also realized that it was difficult for him to stand up. Because of this, he taught Soyun one last breathing technique to facilitate the purification of her heart. Although Soyun was visibly ashamed and asked him to wait, Kolyan insisted that she not speak and to continue. In her mind, she felt how all the corruptions of her heart were being cleaned. Her body and mind seemed to be experiencing a profound change, as if the inner peace was bringing her a divine revelation. However, the intensity of the ceremony made her head spin, leaving her unable to think clearly. When Sholian finally decided to conclude the mass, he gave Soyun a small pinch to bring her back to normal. This caused her to trip and spill the holy water again. Luckily, Kolyan managed to remedy the incident by using the rest of the holy water to purify Soyun's soul. Exhausted, they both finished the ceremony completely worn out. A little while later, Soyun began to scold Kolyan, saying that he was driving her crazy with his intense praying behavior and asking him if he thought he could treat her however he wanted. An ashamed Kolyan apologized and reminded her that she had insisted on continuing. At this, Soyun didn't know what to say, looking nervous. She finally grabbed a pillow and threw it at the boy, telling him to forget it and adding timidly that he was an idiot and to be quiet. For Kolyan, this behavior was a sign that Soyun was back to her usual self. At that moment, she mentioned that she was going to take a shower, leaving Kolyan with the task of tidying up the room. Before she left, she joked, asking him if he wanted to join her, which made Kolyan blush and ask her to stop with those jokes and hurry up. When Soyun left, Kolyan was left reflecting. He thought that maybe he was getting too used to his Nuna's jokes. He wondered if they had spent too much time together lately, but he didn't give it too much thought. With a slight smile, he began to clean the room. Later, Kolyan felt exhausted after having spent so much energy during the day. He wanted to rest, but just as he was about to fall asleep, he heard a knock on his door. Intrigued, he wondered who it could be. When he opened it, he found Somin, which seemed strange to him. He didn't expect her to come looking for him. With curiosity, he asked her if something was wrong. Somin denied having a problem, but wanted to ask him a direct question. Without hesitation, she questioned him if he had been praying with her sister. Kolyan felt a shiver run down his spine when he heard that. The look of fright on his face gave him away, and he quickly tried to pretend otherwise with a nervous laugh, saying that it was impossible for him to be with Soyun. Somin looked at him with a frown, clearly annoyed, and pointed at him, scolding him for trying to mess with her. Kolyan, unable to find the right words, tried to deny any accusation, but his nervousness was evident. Somin, growing more and more irritated, pressured him, demanding an answer. Trying to calm down, Kolyan asked her to lower her voice. However, this only made things worse, as a completely desperate Somin began to scream at him, calling him a lunatic. Alarmed, Kolyan reacted quickly, covering her mouth with his hand to prevent anyone else from hearing them. Somin was stunned and scared and struggled to free herself. Kolyan firmly pushed her into his room, hoping no one had heard them. Once inside, Somin pulled her hand away abruptly, breathing heavily. "Don't touch me," she exclaimed furiously, looking at Kolyan with anger. She questioned what he thought he was doing while he tried to apologize, explaining that he didn't want anyone else to hear them. Confused, Somin asked why all the mystery, considering that his prayers had been heard clearly throughout the house, as if he were a fervent believer. Kolyeon tensed up when he heard this, wondering how Somin had come to that conclusion. Without hesitation, Somin confessed that she had been in her room listening to music when she fell asleep. During her sleep, her headphones fell out, and that's when Cholyeon's chants woke her up. Somin looked at him seriously and asked if he was crazy, scolding him for doing something like that in their house, even if they weren't a real family. Sweat began to run down Kolyeon's forehead. He knew Somin had found him out and that he had no escape. He thought he should have been more careful, but now he was trapped in a dead end. He took a deep breath to calm himself and finally decided to confess the truth. "Yes, I had a mass with my sister," he admitted. Somin was shocked by his words. She looked down, wondering why he had done it. Kolyeon, trying to justify his actions, explained that it had all started because one day Soyeon was angry and ended up drinking too much. As he recounted the details, Somin couldn't help but imagine the scenes of the mass between him and Soyeon. Sadness and frustration began to take over her. Amid internal curses, Somin thought that she also wished she had been with Chulin at that moment. She questioned why he had chosen Soyeon and not her, especially when she had been repressing her feelings for so long. The mix of jealousy, anger, and sadness left her lost in her thoughts, while Kolyeon looked at her, still not knowing how to handle the situation. Somin, trapped in a storm of emotions, wondered why Kolyeon seemed to believe that everything was safe, or that he could treat her like a simple human toy. She had been repressing her feelings for so long that now all these emotions made her feel like a fool. Lost in a state of shock, she could barely react. Cholyeon, worried about her state, approached to ask if she was okay. However, just the sound of his voice made Somin explode in anger. With a sharp shove, she pushed him away and yelled at him not to touch her. "Do you think my house is a magic village? If you're gonna have your masses, do it somewhere else," she snapped furiously. Her tone of voice grew louder as she scolded him, accusing him of acting like a lunatic. Somin continued shouting, asking him if he thought he could do whatever he wanted just because he had a chalice with him. She even compared him to an animal, saying that he seemed to be guided solely by his instincts. Finally, she looked at him with a severe expression and warned him that she didn't want to see him or Soyeon again, making it clear how upset she was. Kolyeon, feeling guilty, lowered his head and decided to apologize sincerely. He admitted that he had made a mistake by doing something like that in their house and that it had been careless. He clarified that the mass had happened because they both wanted it to, but he earnestly asked her not to blame or hate Soyeon. He reminded her that she and her sister were family, and that if anyone should be blamed, it was him. "If you're gonna hate someone, let it be me," he said seriously. For a moment, the atmosphere was silent. Somin, still flushed and feeling nervous, couldn't help but notice the sincerity in Kolyeon's words. Although she wanted to stay angry, it was difficult to do so in front of his genuine expression. Finally, with firmness, she asked him if it would be a problem if their mother found out. A scared Kolyeon replied that yes, it would be a huge problem. A calmer Somin sighed and told him that she would keep what had happened a secret. However, she raised a hand and signaled for him to come closer. An intrigued Kolyeon leaned toward her, getting close to her face. Somin whispered something in his ear, which made Kolyeon straighten up quickly, surprised. "Really?" he asked with disbelief. Somin nodded and reminded him that he would have to keep his promise. A nervous Cholyeon quickly agreed, assuring her that he would do everything she asked. A few days later, somewhere in the city, Cholyeon looked at his cell phone as he searched for an address. He was worried because he was almost lost and thought he would be late. He also wondered if it had really been a good idea to agree to get in touch with Somin. Suddenly, he felt a presence behind him, and when he turned, he saw Somin. She was wearing a Gothic-style outfit, which surprised him. Somin mumbled a little, as he had never seen her dressed that way before. A slightly uncomfortable, Somin avoided giving him explanations and went straight to the point. He had to fulfill what they had agreed on. "You'll do everything I say today," she reminded him with a smile that seemed to challenge him. Going back to the moment when Somin whispered in his ear, she had told him that next week there would be a party, and she wanted him to obey all her orders that day. Later, Somin was lying on her bed, lost in her thoughts. She couldn't help but imagine what it would be like to spend a whole day with Kolyeon. Romantic scenarios began to form in her mind, dining together at an elegant restaurant, walking arm in arm through the streets, watching a movie at the cinema, and then going to a bar for a drink. If everything went as she imagined, they could even end up praying together. These fantasies made her blush and think that she was starting to hallucinate. She supposed her imagination was overflowing because she would have a mass with Kolyeon, something that seemed inevitable. However, she began to question how she had gotten into this situation. She wondered when Choleon and Soyun had become so close without her noticing. Could it be that living surrounded by women had led him to develop a deeper connection with religion in secret, especially considering Soyun's way of dressing wasn't exactly appropriate? In the middle of those reflections, someone wondered if she herself could do something similar to earn an opportunity with Kolyeon. Returning to the present, Somin was lost in her thoughts, nervous about being alone with Kolyeon. However, she had decided to stick with the plan she had prepared for that night. Her reflections were interrupted when Choleon called her name, making her jump in fright and start to stammer. "What do you have planned for today? Do you want to go somewhere specific?" he asked with curiosity. Somin, unable to respond, continued to stammer with her mind in chaos. She had thought of several options: going to a restaurant, eating together, watching a movie, or even taking his arm while they walked. Her imagination was overflowing, even thinking about praying in the street or visiting a magic village. Not knowing how to respond, she chose to tell Choleon to follow her, and that they would find out when they arrived. In reality, she wanted to buy more time to think. As they walked, the girl began to walk slowly, trying to decide whether to go to a restaurant first. However, she blushed at the thought of that possibility and changed her mind, considering the magic village, but immediately contradicted herself, getting even more frustrated. She thought about going to the cinema, or even having a, quote, mass. Her mind was a whirlwind of confusing thoughts and desires to find spiritual clarity, so much so that she even imagined herself reading the Bible in the middle of the chaos. Somin tried to calm down and continued walking while Kolyeon followed her patiently. After a while, the girl suddenly stopped. He, a little surprised, asked her if they had arrived at the place she had in mind, but when he looked around, he was shocked. "Is this where you wanted to come?" he asked, clearly bewildered and expressionless. Somin looked at him and returned the question. When she looked up, she realized that they were at the entrance of a huge magic village. Her face completely changed as she realized that she had arrived there by inertia, lost in her thoughts. Kolyeon, even more confused, asked why she had brought him to that place. The girl realized that she didn't have a convincing excuse. They were in a place with no buildings around, right at the entrance of the peculiar village. In her mind, she wondered how she had ended up there, as if her unconscious thoughts had won, taking her directly to the last point of her chaotic plan. She even came to believe that Kolyeon might be more interested in having a quote-quote mass than in anything else. However, she soon noticed that it was the complete opposite. A worried Kolyeon tried to talk to her, and ashamed Somin quickly denied it, saying that it wasn't what it seemed and that it was all a misunderstanding. She stammered, trying to explain that she had walked without realizing where she was going, but her nerves prevented her from building a coherent excuse. Finally, she remained silent, thinking about how much she wanted to simply be with Kolyeon and how everything had ended up so confusing. Kolyeon, seeing the discomfort on her face, extended his hand and placed it gently on her head. "It's okay," he said in a calm voice. "I understand that you're an adult now, and you might feel very curious about these kinds of places. I also know that growing up can be scary and confusing sometimes." He explained that although he himself had panicked and reacted wrongly, he now understood that his attitude might have confused her even more. Sincerely, Kolyeon apologized. "We've lived together for almost 10 years, Somin. It's okay to admit when we're wrong, but what I want you to understand is that if you're not comfortable, I can't be happy either." These words made Somin calm down a little. Although she was still nervous, she felt that the atmosphere between them was becoming lighter. Both aware of their own mistakes and feelings, they were beginning to find a middle ground to understand each other better. She was surprised to hear those words from her brother, blushing and feeling very attracted to him. Kolyeon continued to encourage her to feel better and reminded her that she shouldn't hold things in. He told her that he would pretend that nothing had happened, and that if she agreed, everything would be forgotten. Because of this, Kolyeon withdrew his hand from her head, which made Somin's heart beat fast. Then he invited her to eat, assuring her that he would buy her whatever she wanted. However, Somin grabbed a part of Choleon's jacket, which left the boy quite intrigued. At this gesture, Somin hoped he would listen. Suddenly, she lunged at him, hugging him. This confused Choleon even more, as he didn't understand the reason behind her actions. He asked her if there was something that was worrying her, since he knew that she hadn't been affectionate in the past and didn't understand what was happening to her, especially in a village as peculiar as that. It was then that Somin commented that she actually wanted to have a mass. something that confused Koleon even more. She continued to explain that she had been thinking a lot about it. She felt more curious when she remembered what he had done with Soyun, but since she was at home, she didn't have anyone and didn't know what it was like to experience a mass. She was curious, and it was something that was difficult for her to do, so she asked Cholian in a sincere tone to accompany her. Koleon was surprised to hear her request. In his mind, he wondered why she wanted to do something like that with him. He remembered that in the past, Somin was in the midst of puberty when her feelings were more sensitive, and how he, a stranger in her life, had suddenly arrived. This made him understand why she got annoyed and grumbled from time to time. He thought that even if it was uncomfortable, he wouldn't abandon her. However, he didn't understand why she was making him these kinds of requests, especially since even though they weren't a direct family, he saw her as his younger sister and didn't think he had the decency to see her in a mass. He tried to explain to her that she should think carefully, as they were now legally siblings, and that would make everything stranger. She had already understood, but it didn't matter to her since she had seen him in a mass with Soyun and asked him why he couldn't do it with her. Somin came to the conclusion that he probably saw her as too small and weak, which perhaps didn't attract Koleon's attention. The boy denied this immediately. Then Somin asked him if he hated her so much since, in case he refused, she planned to try a dating app. This left Koleon confused. In his mind, he knew that no matter how he looked at it, it was still the same. He acknowledged that Somin wasn't lying to him since she was talking to him sincerely. However, he couldn't allow her to go out with a stranger, as that could be dangerous. Although he didn't want to have a mass with her, he couldn't risk Somin exposing herself to some danger. After that, Koleon sighed and told Somin to accompany him. This made her blush. She refused to move from her spot, but Koleon explained that they needed a rosary for the mass, so they would have to go buy one. This left Somin speechless, but a little nervous. She commented that she had already brought some for the occasion. When they were in the elevator, Koleon reflected on whether all this would bring him closer to Somin. Having a mass, something she had always hoped for, made him feel strange, so much so that he avoided looking at her directly. Although she had insisted on having the ceremony, traveling to a magic village just to celebrate it with his sister in the middle of the day, and on a weekend raised doubts in him, he looked at her intently to see if everything was okay with that. At that moment, he spoke to a visibly nervous Somin. He asked her if she was completely sure she wanted to have a ceremony with him, to which she, a little ashamed, nodded. This led Cholian to think that Somin had the courage to ask for something so important directly, and because of that, he decided that he shouldn't judge her so harshly. When they arrived at the place, Somin was blushing because of the surroundings. An intrigued Koleon asked her the reason for her unease, but she tried to pretend it was nothing. However, he noticed that she was very nervous and assumed that it was because it would be her first consecration. This left him speechless for a moment. To calm her down, he approached and took her by the shoulder, which made Somin feel even more uneasy. With a trembling voice, she admitted that she wasn't ready for the ceremony. Koleon sensed this and suggested that she calm down. Although he had only visited a magic village once before, he felt that he had more experience in this type of mass, so he assured her that he would be as careful as possible. He also asked her to let him know if at any time she wanted to stop, something that a still nervous Somin accepted. Still, Koleon proposed that they change clothes to begin. Somin, trapped in her insecurities, was afraid that Koleon might reject her for being so thin. At the same time, she thought that she hadn't seen the boy in his monk's robe either. Then he asked her directly if she wouldn't sit down next to him. When he did, he wanted to know if she was comfortable, to which Somin shyly nodded. However, being so close, she could hear Koleon's heartbeat. He began to perform a jitsu to start the mass, which made Somin feel an inner peace she had never experienced before, not even when she was collecting dolls. Despite this, a strange sensation began to invade her. Suddenly, Koleon made an unexpected move. An embarrassed Somin asked him to stop for a moment, thinking it could be dangerous if he continued. She was about to spill the holy water, but he paid her no attention and continued his work, which caused her to trip and spill the water. Somin didn't understand how it had happened so fast. Something like this had never happened to her, but she supposed it was because it was the first time she had shared the beginning of a mass with someone. A worried Cholian asked her if she was okay or if they needed a break, but she shook her head, assuring him she was fine. Then Somin noticed that the chalice was shining in a way that seemed to call to her. When she turned, she realized it was Koleon's chalice. In her thoughts, she knew that this was the chalice with which she could be guided on the path to God, the same one she had always dreamed of. She couldn't look away and didn't know what to do. Kolyan, noticing her fixed gaze, also became disconcerted. The atmosphere was interrupted when Somin asked him if she could hold the chalice. Kolyan, not understanding why she was asking that at that moment, nervously replied that she could if she wanted to. An embarrassed Somin approached the chalice and took it, noticing how strange it was. Despite that, she was surprised by its shine and the warmth it gave off, something completely different from what she expected, even distinct from her doll collection. Just by holding it, she felt a tingling in her soul. She needed to examine it more closely, so she asked Kolyan if there was any problem with her inspecting it carefully. He, although a little doubtful, agreed. A little later, Somin continued to examine the qualities of the chalice. Holding it in front of her allowed her to recognize that it gave off a completely different energy, even much more powerful than she had imagined. Just by breathing near it, she felt an almost irresistible urge to start the mass immediately. However, this energy also overwhelmed her. Her head spun, her soul trembled, and it seemed to run through every corner of her being. She wanted to be marked by that force that the chalice gave off, because a deep need to find the path to God was growing inside her. Guided by this impulse, Somin began to clean the chalice with dedication, which took Kolyan by surprise since she did it suddenly and without warning. Moreover, he noticed that she possessed an exceptional cleaning technique. If she continued like this, he thought, she could even extract holy water from the chalice. As he watched her, Kolyan couldn't help but feel a strange tranquility. Finally, he asked her to stop, but Somin was absorbed in her thoughts, focused on the start of the mass. She didn't want to let the boy go at that moment. So she continued cleaning every corner of the chalice. To her amazement, the object began to release holy water suddenly. A surprised Somin began to recite something in a low voice. Kolyan, seeing her hesitate, commented that it wasn't necessary for her to drink the holy water, but she ignored him. This left him blushing, because in his mind, he wondered how she had managed to drink it all without effort, as if she were showing off her achievement. That attitude contrasted completely with the Somin he knew. At that moment, Somin spoke to the boy and told him that she wanted to start with a Bible reading. Kolyan, still a little embarrassed, nodded. When they finished the preparations, Kolyan announced that he would begin the reading. For Somin, this was what she had been eagerly waiting for. While he read, she felt a warmth different from anything she had ever experienced before, something that didn't even compare to the time she spent playing with her dolls. Her heart filled with a comforting warmth, and the pain she used to feel seemed to fade little by little. It was a strange, almost magical sensation. At one point, she thought she would spill the holy water, but Kolyan interrupted her, asking if she felt well, since she seemed nervous. An embarrassed Somin asked him why he had stopped his prayers and asked him to continue. This embarrassed him, but in his mind, he knew he had to be careful with the mass, because Somin seemed to be a fragile person. However, he also perceived something else. Her soul was so corrupted that she couldn't handle all that energy. He supposed this could be due to her small stature, but he decided not to stand by idly. As the praises continued, Kolyan asked her again if she was okay, as it seemed her soul was weaker than he had imagined. Somin assured him that she was fine, although a little confused, and asked him to continue reading, but faster. This took him by surprise, and he asked her if she was sure since he had noticed her a little tired. Somin affirmed firmly, admitting that she was willing to follow the Lord's path as he deemed necessary, even if that meant destroying and rebuilding her soul. Her heart was asking for it. Kolyan felt embarrassed by her words, but couldn't stop thinking about how unusual it was to see Somin, who used to get angry easily, begging him to guide her. Although he had doubts, he knew that applying purification techniques could cause her pain, but he also felt a strange excitement about it. Then he began to read the verses faster, which made Somin feel an unexpected relief. It was an incomparable experience. The faster he read, the more comforted she felt. Kolyan, noticing this, took Somin's arms to guide her, which intensified the feeling of calm she was experiencing. It was something so incredible that she couldn't get used to it. Kolyan decided to teach her a yoga-based breathing technique so she could relax better. However, Somin couldn't help but feel strange, since with each verse she heard, her head spun. Despite this, her mind kept going back to the chalice, unable to stop thinking about it. Somin admitted that after the mass, nothing would be the same. She wanted her evangelization to be prolonged, so without hesitation, she hugged Kolyan and asked him not to stop the ceremony, assuring him that he shouldn't worry about her. She only wanted him to focus on the mass as if nothing else existed. These are Kolyan's eyes, who with a certain shyness asked her if she was enjoying the consecration. Upon receiving an affirmative answer, He continued to read each verse with the hope of revitalizing Somin's soul. For her part, she felt that she was on the verge of madness, especially because she was afraid of tripping and spilling the holy water. The energy flowing around her was overwhelming. At that moment, Somin asked Kolian to purify her heart together. He, with determination, used the holy water to carry out the purification ritual, calming the tension that surrounded them. When they finished, Kolian felt a little exhausted by the intensity of the Mass. However, Somin seemed more interested than ever in the rosary. Observing how it was still imbued with all her corruption, she wondered if she would have achieved a complete blessing if she had used it more. But she hadn't had enough. She wanted to continue praying with her Appa. That's why she asked the boy if they were finished, or if they could have another Mass. Kolian, confused by her suggestion, looked at her in amazement. Somin insisted, asking him not to pretend he hadn't heard her. She begged him to celebrate another Mass. He, a little incredulous, reminded her that just moments ago, she seemed to be at her limit. But Somin, although she admitted to being a little tired, assured him that she could still continue. Kolian suggested that they rest for a bit, since they still had time. However, Somin denied firmly. She hugged him and confessed that she wanted another Mass. She assured him that even if he read the Bible at high speed, her soul would bear it. The only thing that mattered to her was that he looked at her and guided her on the path to God. This left Kolian thoughtful. Somin didn't usually behave like this, and he attributed it to the fervor she felt being on the path of faith. It was as if it were a completely new facet of her. While he was reflecting, he noticed that Somin was organizing everything for the next Mass. This put him in a tight spot, as he knew that if they continued, the chalice would begin to shine, and that's what happened. When Somin noticed, she understood that it was time to start, but this time, she wanted to be the one to guide the ceremony. Kolian, after a brief moment of doubt, decided to let her take the lead. Somin, with determination, gave the final touches for the congregation and assured Kolian that just as he had helped her soul before, she would now be in charge of doing the same for him. She began to read the Bible, trying to guide him on the path to God, but despite her enthusiasm, she could barely keep up. As she read, she felt an inner peace that filled her heart. However, a slip made her trip, and she ended up spilling the holy water. A worried Kolian asked her if she was okay. Although ashamed, Somin affirmed that she was. In her mind, she recognized that mistakes like that distanced her from her goal of guiding him on the path of faith. Because of this, she decided to read faster, hoping to redeem herself. Kolian noticed her tiredness and suggested that she lean on him. Although ashamed, Somin accepted his help, and together they continued with the prayers. For her, sharing those moments was invaluable. With each prayer, her mind emptied, unable to think of anything else. While the prayers flowed, Kolian noticed that Somin was muttering something under her breath. When he listened carefully, he realized that she was repeating the suffix "opa." This left him confused, wondering what it really meant to her. When Somin came to a little, she realized what she had muttered and tried to excuse herself hastily. She told Kolian not to stop his prayers, assuring him that what she had said meant nothing. It had just been a thought out loud. However, before she could finish her explanation, Kolian, driven by a moment of courage, kissed her. The unexpected gesture left Somin completely stunned. She never imagined that her Oppa would kiss her, and as a result, her head began to spin. She felt like she could faint at any moment. After the kiss, she was visibly tired, but Chilian prepared to continue with the prayers. Before he could, Somin stopped him since she had accidentally spilled the holy water, which made it impossible to continue immediately. In her mind, Somin reflected on the boy. He had always been so kind to her, but now, during the Mass, he seemed a little rougher, as if he were ignoring her. However, Kolian kissed her again, which caused Somin to blush intensely. She couldn't believe he had done it again. That second kiss made her feel as if her heart had been freed from all its sins. Despite the connection she felt between them, Somin was again on the verge of spilling the water. Kolian decided to avoid more setbacks. He went for more holy water, and with that, they were able to purify her soul once more. A little later, Kolian was reflective. He had performed the ceremony too quickly and wasn't sure if that was the right thing to do. However, he believed that Somin was already liberated. As he prepared to take a break, Somin took his hand, which made him turn around confused. "Can we have another Mass?" she asked with a pleading look. The proposal left him perplexed. He was sure that Somin must be exhausted, but she insisted, assuring him that she could still continue. Faced with his initial refusal, Somin put on a cute expression and begged him to accept. Kolian, although doubtful, ended up giving in on the condition that it would be the last time. "Is there anything in particular you want to pray for?" he asked. Somin remembered a little dog she had seen a while ago and expressed her desire to pray for its well-being. A moved Kolyan agreed. However, in his mind, he couldn't stop thinking about how Somin always managed to center all his attention on her. "You're going to be punished," he said suddenly. Somin looked at him, confused and a little worried. She wasn't sure if he was serious. Acknowledging that maybe she had been selfish and insisting so much, she asked him to give her his punishment. Kolyan decided to assign her a more demanding task. Meanwhile, someone reflected on him, someone who had always been kind to her, but who now seemed to have a more severe, even intimidating side. This scared her a little, but also awakened something else inside her. Without saying a word, Kolyan began the mass. To Somin's surprise, during the ceremony, he gave her a small pat on the back. The gesture disconcerted her, and at the same time filled her with shame and tranquility. She couldn't help but wonder if Kolyan had really done it. Although it was a simple touch, Somin wished for it to be repeated, feeling a mix of emotions. She apologized for all her actions. Kolyan, seeing her repentance, continued to pat her while she apologized over and over again. In his mind, he knew that Somin seemed to be enjoying the ceremony, especially because they were now praying for the little dog. Kolyan understood that these types of ceremonies fascinated Somin, although he never imagined they would get to this point. Somin, for her part, didn't want any of the mass to stop. She was determined to go for more holy water, convinced that it was her duty as a faithful follower of Kolyan. However, fatigue was beginning to become evident in her. While reflecting, she wondered if Kolyan would be upset. Although next to him, she felt a peace so intense that it almost drove her crazy. Despite her exhaustion, Kolyan continued with the prayers, but a somewhat ashamed Somin interrupted him. She asked him to wait, confessing that her soul was beginning to ache. Kolyan looked at her with a certain severity and reminded her that they were performing this ceremony because she had demanded it. He also pointed out that this third mass was completely unnecessary and asked her if they should stop. Somin, who had waited so long for this moment, felt a slight fear when she noticed the change in Kolyan's attitude. Although she was undecided, she knew that if they stopped, she had no certainty of when they could pray together again. With her heart in her hand, she told him that he could continue to guide her on the path of the Lord as much as he wanted. Kolyan agreed, and together they continued asking for peace for their hearts. In an unexpected turn, Kolyan began to read the Bible more quickly. A surprised Somin didn't expect that sudden change, but far from feeling uncomfortable, she accepted it with tranquility. While he felt that Somin's soul was almost completely purified, they decided to use the holy water once more to completely revitalize it. Night fell, and they both lay down on the bed. Kolyan, exhausted, reflected on what had happened. He thought he was losing his mind for having gone so far. For him, it was already enough to have had a mass with Soyun, but now he had even had one with Somin. He also realized that he had let himself get carried away by his impulses more than he should have, feeling that perhaps he had gone too far without her noticing. While he was pondering, Somin began to wake up. Seeing her open her eyes, Kolyan was happy, but is still agitated. Somin got up abruptly. She asked him not to mention anything about what had happened to anyone and announced that she would leave immediately. Kolyan, watching her, thought that Somin had returned to her normal state, something he considered positive. However, he couldn't help but worry. Before letting her go, he wanted to make sure that her soul was calmer. The gesture scared Somin, who, confused, asked him what he was doing. Kolyan quickly apologized, but she, with her cheeks flushed, asked him to warn her next time before getting close. This made the boy blush. Somin, unable to contain her shame, let out a scream and ran to the bathroom to take a shower. Kolyan, for his part, reflected on the ambiguity of the situation. Despite everything, he couldn't forget that after almost 10 years, he had heard the word Appa directed at him. He wondered if this meant that they could have a closer relationship. Meanwhile, a still ashamed Somin tried to calm down under the water. The next day, Kolyan came home after work. As he was going up to his room, Yeseul noticed his presence and called him. Although he was surprised that she spoke to him, he obeyed. When he was about to continue toward his room, Yeseul asked him to wait a moment since she had something important to talk to him about. With a firm gesture, she indicated that he should take a seat.